'cause you're amazing, just the way you are. Welcome everybody to episode 11 of Spike Down with Van Silly and Roy. We're gonna do our best right now to keep it under 20 minutes, so let's go straight into it, Roy. I think we've been going and yapping for way too long every time we talk about every single one of these games every week. So I think it's mostly important for us to just focus on a few going into week by week. So I think most importantly, I think for me, for what kind of hit us in the face for the matches of last week, we're probably talking about the OXG versus Dark Zero, and then the M80 versus the YFP game. So let's start things off here with this OXG versus Dead Zone, because this was a clash between Titans right now for stage 2 or in Challengers overall for Americas. And I want to know your thoughts on the series and the direction that this series is heading towards to you, because it kind of felt when we were watching that first map there that it was pretty much going to be a GG for Oxygen, because it looks so good on the defensive side on that first map.
Yeah, they almost had us fooled, huh? Yeah, that defense side by Oxygen, by the way, on Sunset was insane. And I think it kind of makes sense because their comp is kind of scary, right? Like it's not a new comp by any means, but I think the KO Breach together on that map with the Rage just offers so much utility on the defensive side. It kind of just allows them to steamroll. But yeah, they pretty much had us going. Like they looked like they came pretty strong on the Sunset side. It's just like, wow, what is actually going on? And the only 4 rounds that Dark Zero won in that series, by the way, were pistols in the eco after.
That is
they didn't win a single gun round, which is crazy. So things are looking doomed. Everyone was terrified. We're all shaking, right? And then boom, comes second map. Beautiful response by Dark Zero. They didn't even wait until the second half to pop off. They even had an amazing first half. And it's like, damn. So they go from 13-4 to a 13-7 in the second map. And then the third map starts. And it's like, okay, that's kind of where you expect. Okay, if you sweep one map and the other team sweeps the other map, right? Like logic says the third map should be a close one, right?
Yeah,
and it was a 13-10. Oh my God.
Corey's kind of popping off on that one too on that last map. But even on Vine, when you're looking at that game, there's even been rule switches going back, right? Because that was a map where a couple of weeks ago, even Dark Zero were playing B-Dog on a Sage. But instead, this time around, they're putting Adder on the Sage, and then they're putting B-Dog back into a smoke. So they kind of played back into what they're comfortable on that very map, while also keeping their novelty and bringing the Sage back into their composition, which adds a lot of value into all these Sage walls and what they were doing here for plants on the attack. I mean, they were very, very impressive on how much they could be quick with the stimmies, but also quick with the neon, and then just make sure that it could burst very, very well. But it brings me to a question, actually, because we talk about these games where, it went back and forth and into a final map that was like, we went back into the almighty Haven, where nothing's changed into Haven when it came back into the map rotation, but it was nice to see it back in play. And then also you're looking at the composition for both of these teams, where they also went back into something that's more traditional in how you approach the map of Haven. They didn't try to go for any type of shenanigans of like an ISO jet. It was just like a good old standard jet with double initiator being your breach and your Sova. So it brings me a question for you, Roy, as an IGL or as somebody that thinks about the game a lot. Where do you think we currently stand now that we've seen like 2 weeks of that meta change of 8.11 to 9.0, where you had a little bit of a work back for ISO, but overall, do you still feel that teams that are not playing with like an overtuned neon or an overtuned ISO is falling behind on a certain type of play style on maps? Or can you still make great value on playing traditional comps and keeping to what works with that raise and the double initiator or even double controller?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Vance. I think in the short term, comfort is probably going to win over like developing a brand new role and developing like kind of like reinventing the wheel per se, right? I think that's kind of why we're seeing like sometimes the neon comps are not really closing out series, or like the ISO comps aren't really closing out series. But I mean, to be fair though, like the Jet Sova Breach comp on Haven kind of has everything it needs to play. Like that, it's a very good composition. There's a reason why so many teams like it. And I think the only other Haven meta that was pretty prominent before it got taken out of the map pool was the Viper comp. But that's really nerfed now, right? So like the double controller, the Viper plus controller is, in my opinion, was a counter to the Breach meta, right? Because you deny the sight lines, there's nothing to trigger your util off of, and it makes it kind of awkward to find like the right time with Breach utility. But now that Viper is kind of out of the picture, I think it makes sense that we're reverting back to the Sova Breach on this map. I am kind of curious though, like whether the Jet is the best pick. In my mind, it doesn't feel like she is, but I mean, again, comfort or everything. The op presence is really strong on this map, so I guess it kind of makes sense.
Do you feel though that, because I'm gonna probe deeper with what you're saying with the Viper, with the Viper nerfs, if you remember here, chat, so they only have like one molly instead of two, and then the way that you fuel up is a little bit different than before.
Yeah.
And when you throw your orb, you can't really pick it up anymore.
Pick it up.
But if I remember teams like G2 kind of like playing it where they don't play a Viper, by the way, anymore on Haven, it still feels like the wall that they're putting on splitting the sewers to cut line of sight and cut that, you know, oppression that the breach brings to allow your jet to move forward. I feel that that wall is still quite prominent. So do you think that the Viper, despite those nerfs, could still be useful in a map like Haven, or has she really lost her value with that nerf kit? Because, you know, the standard ways of running that wall, I don't really see too many of the orbs like being thrown for like positioning or whatnot, with the exception of throwing a Viper orb, into B main to try to work around the alarm bot, right? So there is still good value on using her kit.
Yeah. No, that's again, that's a very good question. I'm not entirely sure. I feel like my intuition says double controller is probably not going to be the meta on this map right now, as it currently stands. I mean, even NRG's trying it with like their own twist on it. It was like Clove Omen, right? It looked kind of rough, to be honest. So I think we're going to see some variation of the Breach Sova comps. I think there will be some agents being swapped here and there, like the Duelist, the Sentinel. But I think the core of Sova, Breach, or like Info Initiator, Breach plus Duelist is probably going to stay on this map. That's pretty much my opinion.
That's even another topic to think about, that energy comp. I think it would have been good to have like a Cypher or a Cager or something, so that you don't have to play hard mode on a 3-side map and having zero information on what's going on in Garage and C, for example. But that'll be for another time. Remember, we only have 20 minutes this time around here.
20 minutes. The 20-minute challenge
game, right? We still had a good game, and that was a victory here that we got from Dark Zero. So therefore, they're currently at the very top of the
number one
in terms of in terms of their standings. And we'll visit those standings a little bit later and see what's at stake here going to week number 6. The second game that I wanted to touch upon, though, is the YFP versus M80. So let's take away that third map of Sunset, where it was very one-sided for M80. That pulled out a great Yoru, by the way, on that map on Koala Noob and how they played the defense. But overall, I still want to, give a shout out and throw some flowers on the way of YFP, because they had such a turnaround from the players that they added into the roster and made it fairly competitive against M80, at least on the 2 first maps. Yeah.
Fans, I'm not even going to try to hide it. I think YFP is my most improved team. Not even close, to be honest. The way they looked in stage 1 versus stage 2 is completely different. Even to the minute details, right? Like the micro synergy, how they're playing the map, like the X factors they have in every player now, like the fundamentals seem much better, right? Like everything seems to be clicking pretty well for YFP. Like the first 2 maps were, again, really, really good, right? 13-9 on Haven for M80, and then on the Ascent side, it was 13-9 for YFP. Both of them running the Deadlock Cypher comp, by the way. It still maintains its 100% win rate, even though it has a loss now.
One team was supposed to lose. We mentioned that on the last week. You guys missed it. You guys could always watch that, but for sure,
and then Sunset was just like, okay, we got on Sunset, and wow, M80's style on that map was, it kind of makes sense, to be honest. Like buying enough time for the Koala to move around with his Uto and with his AW presence, it was pretty sick. I'm actually on that very side note, very quick, very small track here. I'm loving the fact that M80 is really trying to push the Yoru, because people have been saying how overtuned Yoru is, but there just isn't any players in North America that are just such good Yoru players that people have justified playing it. But it seems like M80 is leaning into it, and honestly, I'm starting to really see the power of the Yoru in their hands, to be honest, despite their loss on Ascent with it. I just think having a person that can move around with like designated stall utility on opposite sides is so strong for things like, okay, we take a main, we leave, we take this line, and then by the time you even attempt to react on the other side of the map, like Yoru's already there, you know what I mean? Plus you have the extra flashes, so you have like 4 flashes between Breach and Yoru, and an extra one from like a rechargeable one with Dizzy from Gecko. Like it's just a lot of like explosive power and a lot of like flooding power on maps like Sunset, which is kind of cool, to be honest.
Also cool to see, even on maps where you kind of want to like default as well. The Yoru allows for you to like insert players and focus on one portion of the map, and then if he TPs on the other side, you can now have a player that stays behind, that it now becomes like has a better opportunity to lurk, has a better opportunity to flank, hear information, and rotate back. So there's a lot of things that you could do here with a kit around your Yoru, and Yoru, of course, as you've seen what Koala Noob or what even Ethan could do, kind of replaces also the the responsibility of having a second initiator like a Sky, for example, because Euro could still do some very prominent things on helping to retake sites with his decoys and his flashes. So yeah, it's actually quite nice. We'll have to see we'll have to see if this is something that M80 is going to keep sticking to it going into the further weeks, right? Because now there's only 1 week left before we get into the playoffs. But before we get into discussing the standings, I want to ask you though, after this result and seeing that M80 wins, are they actually back now? Can we stop being such big criticizers against M80 now? Like, I feel like
are we still certified M80 haters?
Yeah, like every conversation every week was like, man, like on paper they were like the best team, they were winning everything, but they're probably not the best now. But think about it, that week number 1, when they only got 2 losses this stage, right? And the first loss that they've gotten was against one of the top teams currently in the stage, which is Oxygen Esports, and they lost in overtime, and then like an 11-13 on an 0-2 loss for M80. So it wasn't a bad loss. Maybe it was just like the loss to Blinn, where we're just like up in arms of being like, holy crap, what's going on with M80? But then again, Blinn's looking freaking amazing this stage as well. So have we been overreacting over the performances of M80, because they've been looking pretty solid the last 3 weeks?
Okay, this is wow. Okay, I'll try to make this one quick.
Good luck.
I'm leaning off the M80 hate train, but I'm not completely sold, because their attack sides still aren't as strong as they can be. And despite Xander paying a pretty heavy IGL tax early on when he got the role, he's starting to look pretty comfortable, because he top fragged the series, by the way, just for context. Which is pretty hard to do on the IGL role, but he was struggling. Like, I think almost every person in esports history that's taken over the IGL role has had like a direct performance decrease. Like, there's just been no way around it. Just so much mental tax, right? But I think once they kind of get that going, it should be fine. But as of right now, they're still not converting that many attack rounds, fans, despite their win here. They're still struggling on the attack side. So I think it's just going to take a little bit of time. But time is like, we're going into the last week. Like, this is it. Like, there's really no more time. Like, you have to step up right here, and you also have to step up in playoffs once you do inevitably qualify if you're M80.
I think it also depends, though, on their approaches on certain maps too, right? Because they've been pulling a little bit more deadlock, so that means that they're probably potentially even playing defensive. Double initiator. Double sentinel at that point with Net and also Nismo, right? As this deadlock slash Slifer, deadlock slash like Killjoy. So it's technically supposed to be way more impressive on the defensive side as well. But I'm definitely agreeing with you at this point that they probably maybe need to turn a little bit up on the attack side, just to have a little more,
just to be safe,
of a cushion. Exactly. Once they take the defensive side. But overall, I still think it looks pretty good. Xander's finding his groove. He's also not only, like when you were mentioning that he was, his performance has kind of like slipped off a little bit when he picked up on the IGL, but he was looking pretty good on the way that he was fragging out and clutching as well for M80 in the past week. So I'm actually quite fond of M80 in their turnaround right now, and I'm down to like ride the wave and move forward with them to see how that's going to go next week. But we'll talk about that soon once we get into the predictions of next week, because they have a very tough match coming up here in week number 6 as their final game before we move into the playoffs. And before we move into the playoffs and that discussion, which is going to probably be next week, but it's still nice to see what's at stake, to see who could potentially make it to playoffs, who actually could potentially get relegated. So let's go ahead and pull up the standings here, Roy, and have a look at this and discuss these potential teams that could actually, face relegation before even going into playoffs. Weirdly enough, how the rules work, but let's just focus on relegation right now, which is actually a very interesting conversation, because this now pans down to pretty much the last like 5 teams of the group, from SAD Esports to TSM, Dobros, Winthrop University, and Core. There is a possibility that 2 out of these 5 teams could get relegated. It almost looks like a sure fact that Core is kind of like gone, But the second team that actually could potentially not make it through is still undecided between SAD Esports, TSM, Dobros, and Winthrop, depending how their matches go this week in week number 6.
Yeah, I mean, I think, okay. Number 1, Core is, I think, there's like a 5% chance they don't get relegated, maybe even less than that, to be honest. I think their spot is pretty much guaranteed. There's probably some mathematical formula that is unknown to us at the moment in which they somehow scrape by. But I think as of right now, they're pretty much going to get relegated. And then, like you said, it's going to come down to the difference between Winthrop University or Dobros, in my opinion. There is a world where these 2 teams win. I'm just not entirely sold by Winthrop University's run in the stage, to be honest.
Yeah,
So I think a win here for Core is likely. And then Dobros is going up against Blinn, who has looked pretty solid and pretty like well constructed as a team. So I think it's probably going to be Core, Winthrop, Dobros, like one of those three teams. There is probably some off chance. The universe always likes to play tricks on us, so like, or the Riot script, one or the other. Exactly. Who knows at this point who's controlling what? But yeah, like there's probably some world where it's not these three teams, but I think it'll most likely be them.
Yeah, if we keep an eye here on these standings though, and we want to try to like game it a little bit, and then we'll at the same time we'll go over to the schedule right after of what's coming in week number 6. But Core is actually going to be playing against Winthrop University in that week number 6. And if Core actually wins against Winthrop, and they're both now at 1-5, and Core wins at a 2-0 scoreline, you're now going to map differential. So that would put them at 4-10. Which would be over Winthrop University's at 3-11, which then will have to depend on Dobro's results versus Blinn, because if Do loses and they're going to be at 1-5 and they lose 0-2, they're also at 3-10, which then Core beats Dobro's also through map differential. There's a lot of stake going through, so that percentage that you're mentioning here, Roy, on Core may be able not to potentially not get relegated could potentially still happen, really depending on these matches, which is why we're going to pull up the schedules and show you what's up for this week, and we could go through predictions at the same time here, Roy. And there's going to be some very important games going into the last 3 days, starting tomorrow here, or even today as you're watching this, actually. So on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of July 9th, 10th, and 11th. So first game is going to be Oxygen Esports versus SAD Esports. So Oxygen at this point pretty much guaranteed that they're making it through playoffs. SAD, they need this win as well, though, just to give themselves a guarantee as well. But if they're able to win some maps against Oxygen Esports, they could still be in a decent standing. Exactly. So to look at that, predictions, seeing the results of how Oxygen's been throughout the whole season and how the upwards trajectory SAD Esports has gone to, do you think this will still be a close game despite an OXG win?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. It's like SAD Esports, ever since they picked up First and solidified the roster here in stage 2, they've looked amazing, to be honest. And now they have so much firepower in all of the roles, and Darkus seems to be sort of settling into the IGL role. I think it's possible that SAD Esports could actually win, but I think I'm still heavily favoring Oxygen here.
Yeah, same here. I think there's a lot of firepower coming out of FERPSA, and my honor of having the interview with Dip a couple of weeks ago over their victory. A couple of weeks ago, I think it was like 2 weeks ago against Moistix Shopify, they were definitely saying how they were so confident and happy, and you know, it's nice to get wins, and they seem to have a great tenure with Coach Joe coming in from Complexity's Game Changers, sorry, roster. So that's actually looking like a cool core, but overall you're still facing against Oxygen Esports at this point. So it's a tough match. It's a tough match to try to win. Next game that we have up, so I agree with you. This is going to be an Oxygen victory over SAD Esports. Fluffy Aimer versus Dark Zero. I think this is going to be a very similar conversation too, where Dark Zero seems like they're unstoppable at this point. Yes, they're losing maps here and there, but they're definitely not losing.
Undisputed number 1 team.
Yeah. Exactly.
It has to be the undisputed number 1
team. Yeah, you have to try to beat the best team. Their only losses to overall in this stage has been to Oxygen Esports over in the mid-season cup in the grand finals, and also stage 1 week 2, where somehow Winthrop University showed and got that.
I completely forgot about that. Yeah. So oh my god! Erase that from your memory.
At least you don't want to erase it if you're a fan of Winthrop. You're hoping to not get relegated at this point, right?
We love Copium. Anything for that.
Make it through. But I think this is pretty much a victory here for Dark Zero as well. I'm going to let you talk about the next game, though, here, Roy. YFP versus TSM. This is another nice little close matchup, I think, that would happen. That was going to unravel between two, good teams. But who do you think takes the cake?
Okay, before I get into that, I would like to say that this matchup is actually probably a very important one for both of these teams, because both of them are actually looking to sort of edge their way into the playoffs, and they're both like sort of within each other in terms of points. Like TSM's at 4 points from the last stage, YFP's at 2 points. So like this match actually matters a lot for both of these teams, because YFP needs to try to get as many points as possible, and so does TSM, because they're kind of in the middle of the barrel, right? So like this is a very important match. Somehow I'm feeling like this is a YFP win.
Okay.
Like TSM is looking good though. I no hate to TSM, but YFP they're the most improved team. They look very fundamentally constructed, and it looks like they have a good team dynamic. So I'm going with YFP.
I'm gonna go with you on that one as well. I've been high on TSM's horse for quite a bit, and I think they have some great potential still, but they're still missing that consistency where it's really up back and forth between week after week, and you really don't know what type of TSM is going to show up. Although we're seeing always good positive outcomes and results coming out of YFP. Ever since Will and Jakey kind of joined the roster. So they're looking pretty good at this point. And I think it might be a YFP win. And then Nima is not going to call me out anymore for rooting against them. And if they lose, then it's not my fault anymore, right, Nima? So we'll have to see what's going to happen with that one. And then Core versus Winthrop. We talk about the battle of the mids, but this is unfortunately the battle for bottom to not get relegated, just to face the facts. And Core has been winless so far on the stage. Winthrop University, yes, they had some sort of miracle again on a victory against Fame, against Fluffy Aimers, but overall, they have not been a solid team. These two teams haven't been, unfortunately. Yes, they put up some fights here and there throughout maps, but you need to put a W under that column, and they seem to have been missing the mark every time.
Yeah, they're so close to, and it's like I think they're kind of susceptible to the thing that we were talking about earlier, right? About like experimenting with the meta, and like a big patch comes through, and you want to try to get ahead, but like now they're like stuck in between. Like, do we keep going forward, or do we kind of revert back to comfort? It's a little bit awkward, but. Anyways, for that result, though, I am definitely leaning to Core. I think they're just more constructed. They seem to be a little bit more consistent with the way they're playing the game. So I think a Core win right here is probably likely.
Okay, and a Core win on top of that is going to shake the standings towards the end too. And we're going to have to check back on those once we get back to our week after of
You know me, I love the chaos.
Exactly. We will
bring the
chaos, especially with the Riot script. We need like the Will Minders of the world to just start putting the math and see what are the chances of XY team to go through. We got like a sheet to go across to figure out who's going to make it through. But let's talk about the last two games. Blinn versus Dobros. I think this is going to be a Blinn victory as well. Unfortunately, Dobros is facing another potential relegation going into this game. And then the banger that's going to end all be all for it all too for this season, for this stage before we get into relegation play-ins is MXS versus M80. So now, we just had a conversation where we're saying how M80 is looking so great. Yes, maybe still lacking a bit of confidence on their attack side, but they're still, again, on an upwards trajectory for this team. Do you think that they're going to be able to take down MXS in week number 6?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think MXS is sort of looked. Yeah, no, I think MXS has looked a little weird for the past few matches, to be honest. I'm not. Okay. I mean, their last match was fine. I think their last match was good, but. Before the TSM match, it looked kind of shaky. If they can keep the form they had against TSM, I'm leaning Moist. But they've been very inconsistent, and I think that inconsistency is kind of throwing me off a little bit. So I think I'm leaning for an M80 win right here, to be honest.
Okay, I'll go against you here, and this is just a point talk. Let's go. So both teams being very good, so I think it's very hard to predict who's really going to be able to take this one as well. But I do agree with you if MXS. Has the loss here 2 weeks ago against SAT Esports, but they got a comfortable win against TSM, an up and down, while M80 continues to be on an up and up. This should be a very close game that, again, it's probably like a 50-50, 55-45 at some point, but it could lean either way. So I'm just going to go with the gut feeling here that it's going to be MXS for this week, and then we're going to split on that one as well. So, man, we did pretty good so far. I think how I want to close this right now, Roy, is that we did talk about a lot about teams that potentially could get relegated after week number 6, but we didn't get a chance to talk really about who's going to make it through playoffs. And I think we're going to reserve that topic once play-ins and relegations is done. We're going to have another Spike Down episode in an episode 12, and we'll have a recap of how we made it to this point as to why do we have these top 8 teams going into the playoffs. What do you think about that?
Yep. I love that. I love that.
All right, so let's do that then. So that's going to end it for today for Spike Down week number 11, or episode number 11, rather. And Roy, always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yes,
Hopefully we made it to the 20-minute mark. If not, make sure you click below for the extra few minutes to finish the video on our socials. If not, see you in week number 6 for the upcoming games.